Welcome back, everyone, to the Justice Pro podcast. Today, we're doing a deep dive into U.S. immigration processing
Okay.
and what the future might hold.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at an article from the Justice Pro Network
Ah, great.
for this one, which, I'm sure a lot of you listening are familiar with.
Yeah.
Great resource for advocacy attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about real people here
Mm-hmm.
navigating a system under immense pressure.
Absolutely. It's a system that can be incredibly challenging to navigate, even under the best of circumstances, and certainly right now with all the...
It feels like a lot of things are changing, and we're not even sure, which way is up.
And that's what we're going to try to unpack a little bit today.
Yeah, and the article kind of starts out with this, I don't know if it's ironic or paradoxical or just strange situation where we've got USCIS, which is, the agency that processes immigration benefits, facing budget cuts and staffing shortages.
Mm-hmm.
But agencies like ICE and CBP are seeing their budgets increase.
Right.
So, what's the kind of thinking behind that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that ICE and CBP are the agencies that are most visible when it comes to things like, border security, deportations.
Yeah.
And so I think
that's a hot button issue, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And so I think there's this perception that, by increasing funding for those agencies, you're somehow strengthening border security.
Right.
But the reality is that it's creating kind of a really difficult situation for people who are trying to navigate the legal immigration system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, when you have fewer resources at USCIS, it means that applications take longer to process.
Right.
There are longer wait times. There are more backlogs.
Yeah, and just a general sense of uncertainty, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine, you're somebody who's, trying to come to this country legally. You've filed all the paperwork. You've done everything right. Yeah. And you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and you don't know what's going to happen.
And it's not just the waiting, right? It's the potential consequences that come with that waiting.
Absolutely.
Missing job opportunities, being separated from loved ones, legal complications, because things are just stuck in this limbo.
Exactly. And the thing is that this is not, this is not just a matter of inconvenience.
Right.
This has real life or death consequences for some people.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's really heartbreaking to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And the article points out this thing too, where USCIS relies a lot on application fees to fund its operations.
Yes.
So how does that play into all this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a really interesting point that, USCIS relies heavily on fees. And, when you have budget cuts and you have this, pressure to kind of make up for that lost funding. Yeah. It creates this potential conflict of interest.
Right.
I mean, are they going to prioritize applications that have higher fees?
Yeah.
Are they going to try to expedite certain cases because they need the complicates the whole thing
further?
Easier?
It does. It does. And it also, I mean, the article mentions this too, that, it's not like this is a new problem.
Right.
I mean, USCIS has been grappling with these challenges.
Yeah, it's been a
slow burn, I guess, for you.
It has been a slow burn, and I think a lot of it has to do with policy changes. The article mentions particularly those aimed at reducing family-based immigration.
Okay.
So that means that there are fewer visas available for family reunification, which, can contribute to backlogs. And it can make it harder for people to, immigrate legally.
Yeah, and you think about the sheer volume, too,
right?
Oh,
absolutely.
10.9 million applications last year alone.
I mean, that's a huge...
It's just a mind-boggling number. And, for any agency to handle, but especially one facing, these budget and resource constraints.
Exactly.
It's no wonder.
And the thing is, too, it's not just the volume, it's the complexity of these cases.
Yeah, it's good.
I mean, these are not... simple, straightforward applications. These are complex legal issues.
Absolutely. And so I guess thinking of the big picture, right, we've got this trend toward increased enforcement, reduced processing capacity.
Right.
What does that tell us about where immigration policy is headed?
I think it's a really important question, and I think it suggests that we're moving towards a system that is more focused on enforcement and less focused on providing pathways for, legal immigration.
Right.
And you know, I think that that's a real concern because, you know, when you make it harder for people to immigrate legally,
yeah,
you know, they're going to be more likely to try to do it illegally.
Yeah, or people who, you know, would have qualified for something and would have gone through the legal process.
Right.
Now don't have that option.
Exactly. And you know, the other thing is that it creates this climate of fear. You know, people are afraid to come forward, even if they have a legitimate claim, because they're afraid of being deported.
Right.
And so, you know, it's really a very difficult situation.
Yeah, and thinking about, you know, people seeking temporary protective status,
right,
or humanitarian relief,
right.
These delays, you know, can have
absolutely. I mean,
huge impacts on their lives.
I mean, these are people who are fleeing persecution. They're fleeing violence. They're fleeing natural disasters.
They need help.
And they need help now.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the delays can be life or death for them. Right.
And if there are fewer avenues to legal immigration, you know, it becomes even harder for them to find that safety and stability.
Exactly. And I think, you know, it raises some really serious ethical questions about, you know, our obligations as a country to people who are fleeing persecution.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What can be done to address this?
Well, I think the article makes a really important point about the role of Congress.
Okay.
You know, Congress has the power to allocate funding,
right,
to set priorities for these agencies.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that they could, you know, they could address the budgetary shortfalls at USCIS. They could ensure that USCIS has adequate staffing and resources to process applications efficiently.
Okay.
They could also, you know, push for policies that promote a more balanced approach to immigration. You know, one that recognizes the importance of both enforcement and a clear and accessible legal process.
So it's not just about enforcement, it's about having a functional...
Right. It's about having a system that works for everybody.
Yeah. And the article talks about, you know, moving away from these punitive measures and toward a more constructive approach.
Right.
What can our listeners, you know, as advocacy attorneys, what can they do to help shape this dialogue and advocate for that kind of positive change?
Well, I think advocacy attorneys are really on the front lines of this issue.
Right.
They're the ones who are seeing firsthand the impact of these policies on their clients.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, they can use their voices to raise awareness, to challenge harmful policies, to advocate for their clients' rights.
And we've got organizations like Justice Pro Network to help with that.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point because, you know, advocacy attorneys don't have to do this alone. There are organizations out there like Justice Pro Network that provide resources and support.
Yeah.
You know, they can connect attorneys with other attorneys who are working on these issues. Yeah. They can provide training and education, and they can help attorneys to develop strategies for advocating for change.
Community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, the message here is that, you know, this is a really challenging time for immigration.
It is.
But there are things that we can do.
Okay.
And, you know, advocacy attorneys have a really important role to play in ensuring that the immigration system remains just and manageable.
Well, I think that's a great message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all this.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, keep fighting the good fight. We'll talk to you next time.